The officer was right to defend himself. His life was indeed in danger during the encounter with Sidney Wilson. However, he was fundamentally wrong in how he responded to the situation, revealing a lack of qualifications and preparedness for dealing with individuals experiencing mental health crises. This not only escalated the situation, but also risked his life. Ultimately, he could have saved her life if he had approached the incident with a focus on de-escalation and the use of non-lethal tools. The officer was called to assist a person in mental health distress, arrived on the scene armed only with a gun. Instead of carrying essential non-lethal tools, such as pepper spray, this is a common non-lethal option that can incapacitate a person temporarily, allowing officers to gain control of a situation without causing permanent harm. It is effective in reducing aggression without resulting in fatal consequences. Tasers deliver an electric shock that temporarily incapacitates a person, providing officers the opportunity to restrain individuals without resorting to lethal force. Many police departments are increasingly adopting tasers as standard equipment for officers responding to high-stress situations. These devices can help manage situations involving aggressive or agitated individuals, allowing for non-lethal control and intervention. The use of these devices has been shown to be effective in preventing violent outcomes. Think about this. If the officer had been equipped with these non-lethal tools and trained in their effective use, he might have de-escalated the situation and saved Sidney's life. Instead of resorting to lethal force, he could have employed any of the aforementioned methods to manage the crisis safely. His failure to do so not only endangered Sidney, but also put himself at risk in a high-stress situation. Officers responding to mental health calls must be equipped to de-escalate situations rather than inflame them. The absence of non-lethal options deprived the officer of crucial alternatives that could have prevented violence. The officer's response highlights a significant gap in training. Many law enforcement agencies are now adopting crisis intervention training, CIT, to better prepare officers for encounters with individuals experiencing mental health issues. This training emphasizes de-escalation tactics and the appropriate use of non-lethal force. The officer's reliance solely on his firearm indicates that he did not possess the necessary skills or knowledge to manage the crisis effectively. Many law enforcement agencies have recognized the importance of carrying non-lethal devices when responding to mental health crises. These tools allow officers to control a situation without resorting to deadly force, which is essential for preserving life. Imagine if Sidney Wilson were one of your family members. Wouldn't you have wanted the officer to approach the situation differently? Rather than relying solely on his firearm, wouldn't you prefer that he had non-lethal options, such as pepper spray or a taser, at his disposal? These devices are specifically designed for situations like this, allowing officers to de-escalate tensions without resorting to deadly force. The consequences of such a decision could have been drastically different, potentially saving her life while also protecting the officer from harm. If the officer had been equipped with appropriate tools and training to handle the situation, you might be asking, wouldn't he have chosen to not kill her? You don't know if mental health issues will affect you or one of your family members in the future. Now, why am I telling you this? It's a life lesson that could save your life or the life of your loved ones one day. This tragedy raises critical questions about the training and resources provided to law enforcement. If your loved one was in distress, wouldn't you want the officer to prioritize the preservation of life over an immediate reaction? This incident underscores the urgent need for better mental health crisis, intervention training, and non-lethal options within law enforcement. The community deserves to feel safe and supported, especially in moments of vulnerability. Now, let me tell you about her background. Sidney Wilson, a 23-year-old woman from Albuquerque, had a challenging health background, characterized by a severe mental health condition, bipolar disorder. This disorder is marked by extreme mood swings, including episodes of mania and depression, making it difficult for individuals to maintain stability in their lives. In her poignant Instagram post, Sidney Wilson opened up about her mental health journey, revealing her certification for adult mental health issues. With raw honesty, she shared the struggles she faced living with bipolar disorder, a condition that casts shadows over even the sunniest days. Sidney's words resonated deeply, reflecting not just her personal battles, but also a broader fight against the stigma surrounding mental health. Her message was one of resilience, an invitation to others to acknowledge their struggles and to seek help without shame. She likely wrote about the isolation that often accompanies mental illness, the moments of despair contrasted with glimpses of hope, and the relentless pursuit of understanding and acceptance. In sharing her certification, Sydney was not just marking a personal achievement, she was calling for change. Her post served as a rallying cry for those grappling with similar issues, encouraging them to find their voices and reclaim their narratives. Her courage to speak out in a world that often silences mental health discussions was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Through her heartfelt words, Sydney illuminated the reality of living with mental health challenges, reminding us that vulnerability is not weakness, but rather a strength that can foster connection and healing. Her story continues to resonate, advocating for a world where mental health is treated with the same seriousness and compassion as physical health. Bipolar disorder can significantly affect an individual's daily functioning and overall quality of life. During manic episodes, a person may feel an elevated mood, increased energy, and an exaggerated sense of self-importance. Conversely, depressive episodes can bring overwhelming sadness, fatigue, and a sense of hopelessness. Living with bipolar disorder is an incredibly challenging experience that often goes misunderstood. This mental health condition brings extreme mood swings, with periods of intense highs, mania or hypomania, and deep lows, depression. People with bipolar disorder may struggle to maintain stable relationships, hold down jobs, and navigate daily responsibilities because their emotional state can shift dramatically, often without warning. These fluctuations are not simply moodiness, but are deeply disruptive to one's sense of normalcy and control. For Sydney Wilson, living with bipolar disorder meant that on certain days she might have appeared energetic and invincible, while on others she could have been overwhelmed by feelings of hopelessness, anxiety, or worthlessness. The unpredictability of the disorder can lead to impulsive actions during manic phases or isolation and despair during depressive episodes. This roller coaster of emotions can strain family relationships and lead to misunderstandings about her behavior. When individuals like Sydney are in a state of mental health crisis, they are often more vulnerable than dangerous. Her erratic behavior wasn't a choice. It was a manifestation of her illness. In moments like the one leading up to her tragic death, Sydney was not a threat that needed to be neutralized, but a person in desperate need of care and understanding. Mental health crises, when mishandled, often lead to the victimization of those suffering rather than their protection. Sydney was an only child, born to Deidre Wilson and Jerome Wilson Jr. Her family emphasized her vibrant personality and how much she meant to them, referring to her as their ray of sunshine. She was born on October 7, 1990, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and later moved to Reston, Virginia, where she lived until her tragic passing on September 16, 2024, and spent much of her life in Northern Virginia. Described as tall and physically imposing, standing at 6 feet 5 inches and weighing 330 pounds, she was talented on the basketball court in ways that made her truly stand out. Sydney Wilson's skills were not just a result of natural athleticism, but also of hard work, determination, and an unyielding passion for the game. Her ability to handle the ball with finesse and control made her a formidable player, often the first one her team looked to when they needed a score or a crucial play. She had faced challenges with her mental health. She was grappling with serious mental health issues, leading to multiple encounters with police in the months leading up to her tragic death. Sydney Wilson, at the age of 14, became the youngest student ever admitted to Spelman College. Her academic journey was extraordinary, as she had consistently excelled in school, even starting high school courses at age 10. Sydney's brilliance was clear from a young age, leading her to reach academic milestones that were far beyond her peers. Despite facing teasing from classmates for being too smart, Sydney remained focused and grounded, never letting it affect her self-worth. Sydney's parents played a crucial role in nurturing her talents. They recognized her potential early on, enrolling her in Wilson Academy, where she advanced rapidly through her studies. Her father, in particular, shared a close bond with her. When Spelman College accepted Sydney, it was her father who showed her the acceptance email, leading to an emotional moment that they celebrated as a family. Her academic brilliance was complemented by her vibrant personality. She wasn't just a talented scholar. Sydney had a magnetic spirit, often described by her family as their ray of sunshine. The Wilson family has since advocated for change, using Sydney's story as a platform to emphasize the need for stronger gun control measures and improved community safety, particularly in the wake of her tragic passing. Her academic achievements, along with her family's continued efforts to keep her memory alive, highlight not only Sydney's intellectual gifts, but also the love and support that surrounded her. Her story serves as a poignant reminder of the challenges faced by young, talented individuals who must navigate the complexities of academic life alongside personal struggles. Throughout her life, Sydney struggled with the stigmas attached to mental illness. Friends and acquaintances have said that Sydney was a creative and sensitive individual, but her mental health often put her at odds with society. The lack of effective support from mental health services played a significant role in how events unfolded. Deidre and Jerome poured their love into raising her, always encouraging Sydney's passions, whether it was her art or her domination on the basketball court. They watched her grow with pride, marveling at her talents and her infectious, vibrant personality, and they worked hard to support her emotional well-being throughout her struggles with mental health. Sydney showed a natural affinity for both art and sports early in her childhood. Her parents noticed her creative abilities when she began drawing and painting at a young age. Art quickly became a form of emotional expression for her, a way to channel her thoughts, dreams, and inner struggles. As she grew, so did her talent. She was often praised for her ability to capture emotion and detail in her artwork, something that became a therapeutic outlet for her, especially as she began grappling with mental health challenges. At the same time, Sydney was developing into an outstanding athlete. Her first love on the court was basketball, a sport that not only brought her joy, but also gave her a sense of purpose. Sydney's natural athleticism was evident from the start, and her passion for the game was unmistakable. She practiced relentlessly, whether in team settings or on her own, constantly honing her skills and working on her weaknesses. By the time she reached her middle and high school years, Sydney had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled players in her school. Coaches and peers alike admired her for her talent and work ethic, often describing her as a leader both on and off the court. Sydney's relationship with her parents was incredibly close. Deidre and Jerome were supportive of all her endeavors, always encouraging her to follow her passions. Her family life was nurturing, with an emphasis on open communication and love. Deidre, in particular, was deeply involved in Sydney's life, guiding her through both her successes and struggles. Jerome, too, was a stabilizing presence, offering his daughter both emotional support and practical advice. Being an only daughter, Sydney developed a strong bond with her parents, but she also had a sense of independence. While she was deeply connected to her family, she was also determined to carve her own path. This balance of familial closeness and personal ambition played a significant role in shaping her character. However, beneath the surface of her outward achievements, Sydney began to experience emotional turbulence as she navigated adolescence. Sydney Wilson struggled with multiple mental health issues, the most prominent being bipolar disorder, alongside anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder. These conditions profoundly impacted her life, making it challenging for her to maintain a sense of stability and normalcy, despite her many talents and achievements. Living with these emotional extremes is exhausting, both physically and mentally. The unpredictability of her moods likely made it difficult for Sydney to establish routines or maintain the consistency that many people take for granted. Relationships, schoolwork, and even her beloved sports and artistic pursuits would have been affected by the constant fluctuations in her mental state. Anxiety disorders are characterized by feelings of excessive worry, nervousness, and fear, which can interfere with daily activities. For Sydney, anxiety added another layer of difficulty to her life: flashbacks and intrusive thoughts. For someone with PTSD, certain triggers, such as memories, sounds, or smells, can bring back vivid and distressing flashbacks of the traumatic event. This would have made it hard for Sydney to focus on the present, especially when her mind was caught in a loop of past trauma. Intrusive thoughts and nightmares are also common in PTSD, causing disruption to daily life and making it hard to find peace. Sydney's psychiatrist had been working with her for several months. By the time the tragic events of September 16, 2024, unfolded, Her psychiatrist was a seasoned mental health professional with over 15 years of experience, specializing in young adults facing emotional distress, depression, and anxiety. They had been closely monitoring Sydney's progress, and there were periods where it seemed like Sydney was improving. But the weeks leading up to the incident painted a different picture. Sydney's condition had been deteriorating rapidly. During their sessions, her psychiatrist noticed that Sydney appeared increasingly agitated and restless. She had stopped attending some of her scheduled appointments, which was concerning. Sydney also mentioned feeling trapped and overwhelmed, expressing a sense of hopelessness that alarmed the psychiatrist. Given Sydney's history of mental health struggles and the visible signs of her worsening state, the psychiatrist knew that Sydney needed more than just regular therapy sessions. The psychiatrist attempted to reach out to Sydney on multiple occasions during that week. Phone calls went unanswered and text messages were left unread. Sydney's family had also reported that she was spending more time alone in her apartment and had refused to visit them. The psychiatrist recognized that Sydney was at risk. As a mental health professional, their primary goal was to ensure the safety of the patient. With Sydney becoming increasingly unreachable and displaying signs of distress, the psychiatrist made the decision to initiate a welfare check. Sydney Wilson's parents were deeply concerned about her well-being in the weeks leading up to the incident. They had always been supportive of her, especially during her struggles with mental health. However, as Sydney's condition worsened, she became more withdrawn, choosing to isolate herself in her apartment rather than spend time with her family. Sydney's parents lived in a nearby town, about 30 minutes away from her apartment in Reston, Virginia. They had been trying to maintain regular contact with her, but Sydney had become increasingly unresponsive. Phone calls were often ignored, and when they did manage to reach her, the conversations were brief and tense. Her parents were aware that she was going through a difficult time, but they didn't realize the full extent of her emotional turmoil. In the days leading up to September 16th, her parents became more worried. Sydney had missed a planned family dinner, and when her mother called to check on her, she was met with silence. They reached out to her psychiatrist, hoping for advice on how to help their daughter. They were unaware that Sydney's psychiatrist had already taken steps to initiate a welfare check, understanding that Sydney might need immediate intervention. While Sydney's parents were not physically present on the morning of the incident, they were deeply involved behind the scenes, trying to ensure their daughter received the help she needed. They had hoped to visit her later that week, but tragically, events unfolded before they could intervene. A welfare check is a delicate situation, especially when it involves someone with a known mental health condition. Sydney's psychiatrist was acutely aware of the potential risks involved in calling the police. There have been numerous instances where mental health crises escalated when law enforcement intervenes, sometimes with tragic outcomes. However, given the severity of Sydney's condition, the psychiatrist felt that the risk of doing nothing was far greater. On the morning of September 16, 2024, the psychiatrist contacted the local police department in Reston, Virginia, expressing concern for Sydney's well-being. They made it clear that Sydney was in a fragile state and emphasized that she was not a threat to others, but might be a danger to herself. The psychiatrist hoped that the officers dispatched to Sydney's residence would approach the situation with the sensitivity and care required when dealing with someone in a mental health crisis. Police sent an officer, Peter Liu, to her apartment in Reston, Virginia, to check on her condition. The officer, although trained in basic mental health intervention, was still relatively inexperienced in dealing with severe mental health crises. He was sent alone to handle this situation, an oversight that would prove critical. When the officer arrived, he approached Sydney's door, intending to perform a routine welfare check. He knocked, and after a moment, Sydney opened the door.
I'm Officer Liu.
From her appearance and behavior, it was clear she was in a highly distressed and confused state. The officer tried to engage with her. He moved slightly toward her. This action may have been perceived by Wilson as a threat, leading her to close the door again in a moment of panic or fear. After this, officer made several significant errors that contributed to the escalation of the situation. When she closed the door, officer continued to knock. This persistent action can be interpreted as an invasion of personal space and may have heightened Wilson's anxiety, potentially leading her to feel threatened rather than safe. Effective crisis communication often requires officers to articulate their purpose clearly and empathetically, which Liu failed to do. When Sydney Wilson opened the door for the second time, she was holding a kitchen knife and immediately charged at the officer. She slashed the officer in the face, and despite his attempts to retreat and verbally de-escalate the situation, she continued to approach him aggressively. As the officer tried to back away, he realized he was unprepared for such a dangerous escalation. In those critical moments, Sydney was not merely a distressed individual seeking help. She had become a threat driven by her own internal struggles. The officer's training had prepared him for a variety of situations, but the absence of support from a mental health team and the lack of non-lethal tools like a taser or a pepper spray left him feeling vulnerable and isolated. The officer ordered her, despite his attempts to de-escalate the situation, urging her repeatedly. To back up, Sydney advanced, her mind clouded with confusion and distress. The officer's pleas fell on deaf ears as he was pushed closer to a corner, both literally and metaphorically. In a situation that spiraled out of control, he found himself faced with a life-or-death decision. The weight of that moment was overwhelming, and he felt his only option was to protect himself. In a flash of desperation, the officer drew his firearm. The sound of gunfire echoed through the hallway, hitting her multiple times and marking the tragic conclusion of what had begun as a routine call for help. Sydney fell to the ground, and chaos erupted. The officers being sent alone into such a volatile situation, and failure to equip himself with non-lethal tools all contributed to the tragic escalation of events. These oversights underscore a broader issue in law enforcement. Many officers are sent into mental health crises without the adequate tools or support they need to resolve them safely. Another mistake the officer made was failing to properly assess the potential risk of escalating the situation by being overly persistent after Sydney initially shut the door. When she closed the door, it should have signaled to the officer that Sydney's agitation was worsening. Rather than taking a step back and giving her space, he continued to knock and call out, further heightening her sense of fear and paranoia. In mental health crises, especially when dealing with someone in a distressed state, it's often recommended to give the individual time to calm down, avoiding actions that could be perceived as threatening. The officer's persistence, while well-intentioned, likely increased Sydney's sense of being cornered, worsening her emotional state and contributing to the situation's escalation. Another critical mistake was the officer's decision to carry only his firearm. He did not equip himself with non-lethal tools like a taser or a pepper spray, which are essential for de-escalating situations involving individuals in mental health crises. These tools could have provided him with an alternative to using deadly force if the situation worsened. His lack of preparedness in this regard heightened the stakes of the encounter, as he had no other means to manage the situation aside from his firearm. Had the officer paused and requested backup, or a mental health professional, he might have been able to take a more measured approach that prioritized calming Sydney rather than continuing to push for immediate compliance. Ignoring contextual factors, Liu's actions showed a lack of awareness of the psychological context. Individuals experiencing mental health crises can react unpredictably to perceived threats. By ignoring the situation's emotional dynamics, he missed an opportunity to adapt his approach to one that might have been more effective and compassionate. Liu was alone during this encounter, which is particularly problematic in high-stress situations. The absence of a partner or mental health professional meant that he lacked critical support and insight that could have informed a more effective response. In conclusion, the tragic encounter between the officer and Sydney Wilson underscores the critical need for improved support systems in responding to mental health crises. With the right resources and training, the officer could have effectively de-escalated the situation without putting his life at risk. Rather than being forced into a corner where he felt he had no choice but to use lethal force, he might have been able to protect both himself and Sydney, guiding her toward the help she desperately needed. This incident serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of investing in comprehensive training and support for law enforcement, ensuring they are prepared to handle crises with compassion and care. By implementing these changes, we can work towards a future where lives are saved, not lost, and where officers are equipped to make decisions that prioritize the well-being of individuals in distress. The life lesson from this tragic story is profound and universal. Mental health can affect anyone at any time. Whether it's you, a family member, or a loved one, no one is immune from the challenges of mental illness. This story serves as a powerful reminder that we need to be aware, compassionate, and prepared for these moments, as they can arrive unexpectedly. Before you go, remember that every story, every lesson shared, is a chance to broaden your perspective, and this is just the beginning. If you've been moved by what you've read, if you believe that these messages are powerful enough to change lives, now is the time to take action. Hit that like button, not just to show support, but to acknowledge the importance of being aware, compassionate, and prepared for the unknown. And don't stop there. Subscribe to stay connected, to keep learning, and to continue exploring stories that open our eyes to the world around us. You never know when the next lesson could be the one that changes everything for you or someone you love. Join the community that seeks to grow, to learn, and to make a difference.